So what I'd like to talk about today is this idea of cosmogenesis and relating it to Dogen, in particular, his teachings found in the fascicule Uji. So we're going to look at this Dogen's fascicule Uji together. And my thought here is that I could probably make 2 or maybe 3 Dharma talks out of this particular fascicle. And in this one, I'll attempt to relate it to this idea of cosmogenesis. So in doing that, I'd like to offer 3 different aspects to the talk. The first one is to think about, or to bring up the question of what is our context? What is our context? The second part is to speak directly about Uji and what we call cosmogenesis, or an expanding universe. And the third part is to offer some points on discussion. All right. So, with regards to the first part, our context, shikantaza. Shikantaza means just sitting or meditation. And you'll often hear teachers say, just sit. Right? Well, that's what just sitting, just sit. But what are we just sitting in? We're sitting in a particular context. And shikantaza fits into the Eightfold Path of the Buddha very neatly within the last 4 limbs of right effort, right mindfulness, right concentration, right insight, those last 4 pieces of the Eightfold Path. But there's another piece of the Eightfold Path that we often don't maybe consider when we think just sit, and that is right view. What's the worldview that we're sitting in? And this worldview that we're sitting in makes all the difference for our experience in just sitting. It will inform our just sitting. So the question I want to bring up is, which worldview are we actually living in when we're sitting, when we're doing zazen, when we're doing shikantaza? All right, and to give us some hints as to the probable worldview that we're living in, is most of us live in a worldview that splits up matter and spirit. Right? Matter is one thing, it's a physical. Spirit is another. And usually these are considered 2 different realms. Science takes care of the matter part. Religion takes care of the spirit part. We live in a world that splits up body and mind. Body is here and mind is something that goes on in this particular part of the body. It's elevated above the body. It's the highest point of the body, this mind. And we live in a world that splits those 2 things up. We pay particular closer attention to the mind than we do to the body. We feel it's more important. Maybe you don't, but for the most part, that's how most people live in our world, is doing that, including myself. Right? We see the world as a machine to be used for our benefit. What's used? The plants, the animals, and the minerals are all used to our own end, and there appears to be no end to our consumption. We feel entitled to do what we wish to the planet. We see a sacred space is defined by a set of 4 walls, right? As opposed to a sacred space being a natural formation, as opposed to a sacred space being, say, the Missouri River, right, or some natural form. But this is a particular view in the modern, you can call it the industrial mindset, a mindset that sees things in terms of mechanism and usage. This is not the view that Dogen had in his time, nor is it the view of modern science. While Dogen's view and modern science are not exactly the same, they're very, very compatible. And while Dogen didn't know about evolution like we do today, that species actually evolve, or about cosmogenesis, this idea that the universe is constantly transforming, is constantly being birthed anew in every moment, even now that we come from stars, he did understand change, and he believed we were all destined for Buddhahood. Dogen saw the universe, all things in it, moving towards complete, perfect enlightenment. In fact, the universe itself was already preaching the Dharma. The universe itself is the context for the Buddha. Cosmogenesis, this idea of a continually creating cosmos, can help us to update Dogen's understanding for modern times. And Dogen's understanding can help us have confidence in the Dharma as adaptable to our times as well, to the modern scientific way of thinking. So cosmogenesis is what we are in, according to our modern, most up-to-date way of perceiving the universe, our most up-to-date view of the world. Another way to say this is that what the data is showing us is that the universe, as we understand it, is not a place, but is itself an unfolding story. All right, that just try to get your mind wrapped around. The universe itself is not a place, it's not a location, but an unfolding story. How might this idea of seeing the universe as a story impact our Zazen? Are we doing shikantaza in a cosmos, or are we sitting in a cosmogenesis? Those are two different worldviews. It's not just another thought. A worldview is not the same thing as thought. From the Buddhist, from the Eightfold Path, we have right view is the first one, and then right thought springs out of right view. All right, so cosmogenesis is about right view. It's not about thought. It's not about thinking, oh, that's just one more thought. No, our view of the world affects our thoughts. Okay, now let's look at Uji, this fascicule from Dogen's Shobo Genzo. And I want to just shout out to Shinkyu. I've known about Uji for some time, but Shinkyu and I were talking the last time I was there about the compatibility of this with cosmogenesis. And so I just want to shout out to Shinkyu to thank him for pointing out particular verses that I want to share today, because I think they can help us here. So, Uji, don't you just, Uji. U means being, and Ji, time. Uji is inseparable, and right from the title says everything. Being and time are inseparable. Dogen's just going to repeat that message throughout. And this has huge ramifications for how we view the world. Because usually we see being and time as separate things. Right? Clock time is one thing and being is another. But Dogen is pointing to the merging or the absolute inseparability of being and time. He says, for the time being here means time itself is being, and all being is time. Wow. There is no time without being. Right? There's no time separate from being. Perhaps we could use the word becoming to describe Uji. Right? But it's hard for us to see this because we've played so much stock in clock time. But Dogen, he didn't live in our world. He saw time in nature, in light and darkness, as well as in life and death. Perhaps not too much like our own ancestors. Okay, next line. I'm not going into each one of these lines, but picking out specific ones that I think are pertinent for us. Because the signs of time's coming and going are obvious, people do not doubt it. In other words, we know time exists. We can see we can see how we change from one year to the next, how our face changes, we age, and etc. We can notice the change in the light and darkness throughout the day and in the seasons throughout the year. Right? And if we bring this down to evolutionary time, we're invited, right? Modern science invites us to also include a sense of evolutionary time into our knowing of time. What does that look like? What might that feel like? What might that be to sit with? Right? Okay, he says, although they do not know it, although they do not doubt it, although we do not doubt the signs of time's coming and going, we do not understand it. Although we do not doubt it, we don't understand it. And I would say, because we don't doubt it, we're never going to understand it. We need to doubt. We need to bring doubt to focus in on our incessant understanding of time as separate from being. To doubt that. What would happen in our sitting practice if we began to doubt our conceptions of time? Right? And a lot of times we're thinking, I can sit for 30 minutes. That's not a good way of sitting. That's not a good worldview to come to sitting with, because we're thinking about time as separate from being. These two different. We've got to concentrate our minds that merges time and being. And my teacher would say, listen to your body. Your body knows what time it is. That's another way. I think that's a beautiful way. I think she said it beautifully. It's a beautiful way of thinking about your body knows what time it is. Listen to your body, right? But we do not doubt. And the other thing he says is we do not understand time. This is huge. We don't understand time. And I don't think that's a bad thing. Actually, when we begin to doubt this time, this separate time, then our minds will enter incomprehensibility. We'll enter really a deep sense of mystery, or what we call don't know mind. Not knowing. To not understand. This is important. This focusing in on not understanding. All right? If we understand it, then what's the point? It's that we can't comprehend being time. We can't comprehend it. That's the beauty. That's the beauty. All right? We don't want to get rid of that. We don't want to try to understand. Well, we want to enter into not understanding because we're already at understanding. We want to enter into not understanding because we're already at understanding, or we think we understand. Right? This is where doubt comes in. To not understand is to live in awe. Right? To not understand is to live in awe. Right? It's an invitation. It's an invitation. Dogen, I love this. The way the self arrays itself is the form of the entire world. See each thing in this entire world as a moment of time. Boom. Wow. Can you observe the world moving or arraying itself? Listen to this. 100 years ago, this year in 1924, Edwin Hubble, scientist here in the United States, he discovers He was looking through the most powerful telescope of his day to determine whether the Milky Way galaxy was the only galaxy in the universe or not. What he learned was astounding. He found out that not only is there trillions of galaxies besides the Milky Way, get your mind wrapped around that. In each galaxy, trillions of stars, trillions of galaxies. But what else he found? These galaxies are all moving apart from each other through time. If you calculate through time where they're going, they're moving apart from each other. And he deduced that if they're moving apart, they must have had a place where they completely coalesced at one point. Right? Boom. That's what we call the Big Bang. Right? If we take those galaxies, draw them back through time, they're all coming closer and closer together. They break up, right? Then we've got the hydrogen atoms, and they're all coming together into one single point. This is an astonishing discovery, right? We can't see it. Well, we can and can't see this, because what was also discovered later in the 1960s was the background radiation of the Big Bang, that is still present. And this is this idea, cosmogenesis, that the universe is constant. It's in motion, which is very different from the way that our ancestors, let alone our parents, saw the universe, right? When they woke up in the morning, everything was still. The sun comes up, right? That our language betrays the way that we see the world. The sun comes up. Rather, what we're seeing is not only is the earth moving around the sun, that's old news, right? That's old news. But we're seeing now that the sun moves, the stars are moving, and the galaxies themselves are moving through space. Astonishing to think about this. All right. Now, Dogen. Things do not hinder one another, just as moments do not hinder one another. Thus, I love this, thus the self, setting itself out in array, sees itself. Right? One way that Thomas Berry says this is that the universe is coming to know itself through the self-reflection of the human. Or another way he says it is, the human is the self-reflective aspect of the universe. All right? Just get your mind wrapped around that stuff. Dogen. Know that in this way there are myriads of forms and hundreds of grasses throughout the entire earth. It's another way of talking about the whole universe. There are myriads of forms and hundreds of grasses throughout the entire earth. And yet, each grass and each form itself is the entire earth. Whoa! Right? The blade of grass he's talking about is ourself, right? He's saying the self is the entire earth. Now get this line. He says, the study of this is the beginning of practice. That's the beginning. That's when we sit down and do zazen. That's the beginning of practice. To know that you are the whole universe in the form of a human being. That you are that aspect of the universe that is able to reflect on itself. You are the universe reflecting on itself. Let's put it that way. All right? This is the beginning. All right. So I want to offer a couple of questions for discussion to think about, to consider here. In light of cosmogenesis, the universe is not static as we once thought. The stars are not fixed. They have not been around forever. The universe is not a place, but an ever-unfolding story. How does this idea of the universe as a story impact our sense of self and our place within the larger cosmic narrative? All right? Let's just take a moment to think about that and to study it and discuss it.